drugs is the subject of this afternoon's programme. Let's see what our studio audience this afternoon for the debate think about that. Anybody want to come back immediately on what you've just seen? Yeah, OK, right up the top there.
That film, that video, it was just to scare people. It wasn't to educate people at all. You didn't find anything out about drugs from that video at all.
Yeah.
It was just scaring people. So why not have something that really educates people? What different drugs, how to use them, how to avoid them.
Yeah, but then wouldn't it get tricky? Say that we did something, we told people how to use drugs. Wouldn't you get, I mean, you'd, like on a programme like this, you get everybody come down on you for that. I mean, who actually steps out and says, you know, this is how drugs are taken and this is what they will really do to you?
Yeah, and this is what they do to you and this is how to get off it, you know? Because there's people going to be watching who are on drugs who want to get off.
Yeah.
And there should be some...
Do other people feel that the shock tactics generally used by television or the newspapers just really don't work with you at all? What you want is just basic information? Yeah? OK.
I think they ought to be more realistic because, like with cigarettes and alcohol, they tell us all about it. Whereas with drugs, they just say, no, you just get your friend, say, coming up to you and saying, oh, it's a really good experience, try it. But you don't know enough about it to know what extent it's going to change you and what exactly it's going to do to you.
Yeah.
And I think really they ought to say that. I mean, it's not encouraging anyone.
Can I ask you one thing, though? Who is the they that ought to say these things?
Just the media. Because they're just saying to you, oh, drugs will kill you. But they don't tell you how, and they don't tell you why, and they don't tell you why all these millions of youngsters are still going on doing it, even though it's killing them.
I wonder what it is that people actually want to know. Is it just...
Well, I mean,
what
some drugs aren't harmful. I mean, I don't know all the medical facts about it, but cannabis isn't harmful, as far as I know. I mean, apart from the tobacco you need could possibly give you lung cancer, whereas certain drugs are addictive.
Let's find out. In the studio this afternoon we've got Dr. Michael Meacherson, who should be able to answer any medical questions you have. This young man's just said that cannabis isn't harmful and that a lot of stuff drugs aren't. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's perhaps the way drugs are used which is harmful rather than the drugs themselves. I mean, I have a criticism of your film straight off, that it only concentrated on certain drugs. It left out alcohol and nicotine, which many people have brought in. It also left out the whole range of drugs like minor tranquilizers. Now, tranquilizers have their uses, but they are perhaps the most widely abused drugs of all, with actually pushed on people by doctors very often who come to the surgery not even asking for a tranquilizer. So I think that one can narrow down the focus too much. Can cannabis be harmful? Yes, it can, I think, in certain circumstances. There is evidence that it can be harmful, particularly if people come to depend on it in order to cope with everyday life.
So in what ways is it actually directly harmful, cannabis?
Well, as with alcohol, people can go around under the influence all day, and then their social life suffers.
Yes.
Their contacts with other people tend to suffer because it's a drug that people tend to withdraw from others. So in that sense, cannabis can be harmful. It doesn't rot your liver like alcohol.
No. Does it make all your brain cells die and your arms drop off like they told us at school?
There is no evidence that it actually affects the brain cells again, whereas alcohol does.
Really? So you'd say that alcohol was a lot worse than smoking dope?
In purely technical terms of what it does to your body, yes, but you're less likely to get sent to Brixton Prison for smoke.
Well, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the relationship to alcohol and, say, soft drugs like dope?
If you were to legalise that and have it run through the government, OK, look at the revenue that the government would pick up. Look what happened to gin. Gin was illegal X many years ago in the 1800s. Look at the revenue they're pulling off on alcohol now.
Yeah,
so surely if it was controlled by the government, right, the price would perhaps stay the same, but people wouldn't be going to just anybody, Joe Bloggs in the street, to get it.
Does somebody want to answer that? Why soft drugs should or should not be legalised? Come on, you must have an opinion on this. OK.
You ought to have a relaxation on the laws. And you get... I only can speak from personal experience, but I can get a better buzz out of smoking marijuana than I can from drinking a lot of alcohol, and it's cheaper. It offends their morality if we basically live in a conservative society, and they don't want
yeah, but so
drugs.
drinking's immoral.
Oh,
So-
that's different, because
No,
I mean...
why is it different?
Why is it different?
Well, because it doesn't offend conservative morality. You're allowed to, I mean, Sir John, whatever his name, can go down to the bar and have a quick snifter, and he doesn't mind, but he's not going to go down and have a joint, is he, if he's at some parliament?
Why not?
Perhaps you could answer the question, why do you think it is that so many young people are attracted towards drugs? What are the reasons for it?
It's an escape from reality. I mean, people get really pissed off with life sometimes, don't they? They go drinking, you know, just to relax. And some people just turn to drugs because it's more relaxing. It's more of an escape.
Yeah. Now, Andrew Tyler, you work for youth clubs in Camden. Now, the young people that you come across in your everyday experience in Camden, do you find that a large proportion of them are taking drugs of some sort? And what type of drugs is it that mainly young people take?
Well, it depends on young people. There are in one club I've worked in, they did a lot of sniffing of various inhalants, glue, Tipex. Some of them got into trouble doing that. Others carried on in a reasonably...
What type of trouble do you mean?
They fell off walls and hurt themselves. They would become aggressive. But those people tended to be aggressive anyway.
Does anybody want to come back on that?
Yeah,
drugs?
I mean, there's one point I want to come back on. You said we have been talking about soft drugs and hard drugs. I haven't been talking about soft drugs and hard drugs. I think it's very important to realise that almost any drug which affects the brain can become a problem, and that you cannot say those drugs are safe and those aren't. There are some drugs which are more addictive than others. They're not necessarily the ones which are most likely to kill you in an overdose, and are not necessarily the ones that are most likely to give you lung cancer. So let's talk about hard drugs and soft drugs. Let's talk about the hard use of drugs, the sort of person for whom taking drugs has become such a central part of their life that there's practically nothing else going on. Having said that, you know, the way that a minority of people come to get involved with drugs is clearly a disaster. How do we stop it? What controls we should have? That, I think, is what we should be discussing.
If somebody goes around with a group of people who smoke, he knows the dangers, and he knows that if he starts smoking, he might one day get lung cancer. But that sort of education doesn't exist with drugs.
Right.
Whatever.
I mean, you know, I would also agree that I've run seminars for school teachers, and they're all too busy after 4 o'clock correcting homework to come to seminars. But I mean, basically, I think education is not a matter for the BMA to pontificate about, but for teachers to get themselves properly informed. And I think drugs are an increasing problem.
It is to do with you. I mean, you should be taking steps to educate people. I mean, it's like...
No, I shouldn't.
It is. It's the prevention and kill thing.
If you don't, you're going to wind up in the same position as the
you'd
Undertaker. You take care at the end.
Think how much money you'd save yourself. It's like now we've got, you know, it's going to be illegal not to wear a seatbelt in a car. That's so hospitals save money. It's the same thing. If you just spent the money on educating people, then you'd have far less drug addicts having their stomachs pumped out, whatever.
There are 3 booklets here, and there are others put out by Release, which are very good. They give... It's so easy when you talk about drug education to lose somebody, because a lot of the reason people do drugs is because they want to be on the edge. And if you talk about danger and flatten people with dry information, they won't be seduced away from something that they want to do.
Just a minute, could we just conduct a little examination and see what is happening to any information there is? Pat, you're a youth leader, aren't you?
Yes,
I've just been told.
right.
Now, do you get stuff like these leaflets and what have you through the post sent to you?
I have information on drugs which I have handed on to some of the young people, but it's something that needs to be done much more.
If you go to a youth club for a good night out, you won't want to pick up leaflets on drugs and everything. Wouldn't it be better to do that in the school?
This is a ridiculous thing. We're all saying at the moment we want education. He's got to give it to us. He's got to give it to us. And now you're saying you go for a good night out. You don't want it anyway.
When I went to school in the 5th year, I had 3 talks. One was on drugs, one was on VD, and one was on sex. And they would last about 3 hours. Right? And they all 3 one of them went over my head, and that was the one on drugs, because the bloke had such a boring voice, I didn't bother listening.
At my old school, there were various books and such like that the teachers brought in, showed us, quoted bits and pieces out of, right? Perhaps the doctor can correct me on this, but one fact that I came across was that cannabis does in fact cause sterility temporarily while you happen to be taking it, etc., and due to its after effects. I don't know, but that's one of the facts that I came across in this book, which I found interesting, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps we could ask you to enlarge upon that. I don't know why that's funny. Could you tell us something?
There's a famous medical textbook of the beginning of this century which alleged that coffee caused masturbation, and of course that masturbation caused insanity.
And coffee.
Yeah, there is some evidence that heavy cannabis smokers have slightly lower levels of the male sex hormone in their blood.
Could we ask you one thing before we finish it? Could you give us a rundown of what these drugs, just basic headings of drugs and the type of things that these drugs do? So at least we do give some information to the people at home.
No, I really don't think I could briefly.
Because
let me give an example. Two sorts of speed, cocaine on the one hand, amphetamine on the other, right? Very, very similar drugs, actually. If they're given as an injection without the person knowing in small doses, people can't tell the difference. But at the moment, because of the very high price of cocaine, people don't get in such a mess as they did with amphetamine in the 1960s. That is a price factor.
Could you tell us how the glue sniffing works? Because this is all a bit of a mystery.
Well, as I understand glue sniffing, it is similar to the anaesthetics that doctors use to put people to sleep for operations. It is a very short-acting sedative drug, similar in many ways to alcohol, but with a very short action which you can inhale by getting the vapour from the glue or other substances into your lungs and
so
thence to your brain in a few seconds.
And what's the damage that doing that does?
Well, primarily the risk is intoxication and that you may fall off walls, as we've heard, or get aggressive and fight, as with alcohol. In heavy overdose, you can stop your brain working altogether and it can affect the heart occasionally. The biggest risk is probably doing it in a very confined space or putting a bag over a person's head in order to increase the concentration, and people can simply die of asphyxia because they don't get any oxygen.